Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of the worst races to play in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaigns. Starting with an honorable mention, which is Slaanesh. But why an honorable mention? Why not just say it's awful? Because Slaanesh is, from a practical standpoint, pretty awful. Well, here's the thing. It's more of a tuning issue as opposed to a race design issue, because Slaanesh as a race is actually incredibly well designed for campaigns. Between subjugation, vassalization in multiple different ways, including seductive influence, it is a pretty damn good campaign system. And ever since the cults have been changed, you actually now have the same kind of campaign flexibility that Skarbrand used to have a while ago, where you can go around the map and teleport to various locations. In fact, you're even better at this than Skarbrand ever was, because you can establish cults around the world with proliferate cults. So this race, in a lot of ways, should be one of the best races to play in the campaign, but it's not. Two reasons. One, a lot of Slaaneshi units have very low armor, and I've talked a lot about how Data Resolve is pure garbage. The Slaaneshi army may be incredibly freaking strong in an actual battle. It does need units. It does need DLC for units. But it may be incredibly powerful in an actual battle. It is incredibly powerful. Like, there are a few things that I'm afraid of when playing as, say, the High Elves. Slaanesh is actually one of them. Because the Slaaneshi Demonette army, yeah, you can defeat it with ease. It can also destroy you with ease. So it's one of those situations where it can be a problem dealing with them. They have great cavalry. They have really good, fast-moving infantry that is available. The problem is, though, that you kind of realize that the best freaking thing to do in a Slaanesh campaign is forget all the demon units. That is an inherent issue, CA. But forget all the demon units. Just go cast warriors, and then chosen of Slaanesh. Because, yeah, getting cast warriors of Slaanesh and then getting chosen of Slaanesh, just regular ones, they're good. They're really, really good. They're not the best they're not the heaviest infantry, but here's the thing. They're fast. And that is, and they've got some physical resistance, so they're really, really solid to use as units. And devastating flanker on cast knights of Slaanesh with lances is also really good. Like, there's a lot of fun demon units, but because of the way demons work, because of the inherent issues with that, there's just not really enough reasons. Now, you do need to own the Champions of Chaos DLC to make that work, so that's a problem. But the glass cannon unit playstyle works well in battle. It doesn't work well on the campaign map because of auto-resolve. Beyond that, you also have the problem limited recruitment slots, boring army compositions, because, yeah, start with Forsaken, then go into Warriors Chaos when you get to tier 3, and that's it. But Slaanesh is also one of the only races that has no real way of improving casualty replenishment. Okay, there is a way to improve it slightly, but I emphasize the slightly aspect there. So there's no real way to get like 30% casualty replenishment, which is a problem when you pair it with a bad auto-resolve. Fix the freaking auto-resolve, CA. But this is not necessarily a race that needs a major overhaul. This is a race that needs an update, a new hero, new units, changing of tiers, all that kind of stuff, more recruitment slots potentially, etc. And honestly, like, the whole vassal system does also need an update, because, like, right now, I wish we could interact more with them, use them better, like, you know, give them more orders and all that kind of stuff. It's a bit of a shame. But still, it does have issues, but I can clearly see how Slaanesh could be a really good race, with, funnily enough, not necessarily major tweaks to them. That's not something I can say about the races that are actually on this list. At number 5, it is the Tomb Kings. Out of all the races in Warhammer 3, I think Tomb Kings represent some of the worst philosophy from any race in the game. See, in general, in Warhammer 3, most campaigns have a really hard, challenging early game, especially if you're playing on Legendary. But regardless of difficulty, it is the early portion of the campaign that's the most interesting, where you have the most amount of decisions, where the things you do matter the most. And then once you get past like turn 30, 40 or so, the campaign is done and the rest that is left is a grind. That's not how it works for the Tomb Kings. In some ways, they work best in the current meta, and in a sense that if you survive 30 turns, you decimate everything that stands in your path. But the problem is how. They don't really have choices, because yes, they can get a lot of different units, relatively early. That's not the problem. Except that most of these units are not really worth recruiting. You tell me at this rate phase that recruiting skeletal horse archers, for instance, is worth it, or Nehekara and horsemen. Not gonna buy that. A lot of the interesting stuff is locked behind higher tiers, but you can't even recruit another army until you spend 15 freaking turns or 14 turns researching a dynasty, and even then that only unlocks another army. Basically, Tomb Kings with their free recruitment and immortal lords, because all their lords are immortal, end up in a situation where if you survive 30 turns or so, you got free armies, and the higher you build your settlements and get past the unit caps, you are in a situation where Vlad can lose the campaign. The only thing you might lose are your heroes. Like, even the lords that are leading the army, you can just build infinite disposable armies with only the heroes potentially being at risk. And even then, that's only until they get to a certain enough level. And hero capacity is not tied to any particular building. That's good. The problem is it's tied to research, which is bad. Another major freaking problem of the Tomb Kings is the whole Books of Nagash garbage. And I do mean garbage, because let's consider the Books of Nagash. They're spread across the world. You tell me with a straight face that if you're playing a campaign as Cetra, you're going to want to go over here in the White Tower of Hoeth just to get a book that gives you 50% commandments. I'm not sure what kind of campaign you'd be playing like and what kind of player you would be to endure that. I've never done that. Like, I've played plenty of campaigns, 100+ turn campaigns, plenty of those as well. I've never gone out of my way to do it. You have to go out of your way. It's not like just a question, oh, you can't do it in a long campaign. No, you have to deliberately go out of your way to do shit like this. Another problem with the books is the randomization. Whenever you start the campaign as the Tomb Kings, it's not like the books are in certain locations and you get this effect and that effect, right? No. The books are randomized. But here's the thing. There are 2 books. The rest are garbage. But there are 2 books, maybe 3, that are worth a heck of a lot more than all the others combined. And that is the 5th book of Nagash, because that gives you 1 army. Keep in mind, it takes 14 turns, and that's by default. Research rate slows down after that, but it takes 15 turns to unlock another army, or to turn 15, and then you get, if you can get this book within that, by turn 15, you've got free armies. But it's not just that. It also gives you 10 unit capacity, because it's 5 for regular Tomb Guards, 5 for Tomb Guards with halberds. That's crazy. So that's one. The other one is the 1st book of Nagash. If you can get that close enough, that gives you 1 hero capacity to all heroes, and thankfully that's on a rogue army over here as opposed to settlement. And the 3rd book that might be worth it is certainly not the 4th book of Nagash. Which one is it? The 3rd book is the 6th book because of Lich Priest Shadows, so that gives you a certain magical capability that you lack. But that's really it, to be quite honest. I mean, maybe the wind recovery time, but still. There's 8 books of Nagash in a campaign. You don't need the books to win a campaign, to be damn certain for it, but having an entire school of magic locked behind one of these books, having an entire army, having 1 hero capacity locked behind this garbage system does make a campaign awful. In fact, it makes it awful in the sense that whenever you're starting a Tomb King campaign, the one thing you're probably going to want to do to ensure you have a decent enough time is start it again and again and again and again and again. Let me tell you how many times you can start a campaign before you get the book that you want. Dozens. And I'm just talking about 1 book. God forbid you might want to have 2 books next to you. I was incredibly freaking fortunate when I started this campaign, etc., and I actually got the 5th book of Nagash in Lamia, which is something I can take reasonably quickly in this campaign. But the fun fact about the book of Nagash, Tomb Kings have one of the greatest powers in the campaign in that they can vassalize via diplomacy, right? So if I sell a settlement, say with barracks to, or several settlements, or higher level settlement with barracks to a faction, I can vassalize a faction. Make them my vassal. You cannot get the books of Nagash even for vassalization. Forget the alliances. Cast Dwarves can get their artifacts in the Realms of Cast campaign for alliances. Forik can get it for alliances. Tomb Kings can't. And this doesn't just apply to the Tomb Kings. It applies to Manfred, it applies to Volkmar. It is a system in the game that ruins all these campaigns. In fact, for Volkmar in particular, the entire Book of Nagash system is even worse because his entire a lot of the strength that he has, including Electrocom State Troopers, are tied to him getting these Books of Nagash. It's not a good system. I can go on. Hero capacity tied to research. Also canopic jars. You can only get 30 canopic jars per battle. There's post-battle loot doesn't increase it, and it's the most important resource because there's certain research that's tied to canopic jars. There's certain hero capacities that you can increase with canopic jars, and it's not like these are cheap things either. Like you might think, now imagine if we could get an extra army capacity for say 5,000 gold and 100 jars. We could do that reasonably quickly, right? So instead of waiting for the research, which should maybe mean more of a bonus as opposed to a mandatory requirement, we could play the campaign well enough that we could do it. But no, that's not how it works. But once you get all of these things, once you get 2, 3, 4 armies, and you get a decent amount of unit caps, you're unstoppable. You're literally in a situation where there's nothing in the campaign that can stop you. At best, slow you down until you recruit an entire stack later. The worst part is you can recruit a lot of units very quickly. So it's like, once the Tomb Kings get going, there's no freaking stopping these guys. But they need to get going. That is not a great balancing in a campaign. I mean, all factions get stronger as they play, but none have the significant divergence in terms of power that Tomb Kings have between their early game and their late game. That's just massive. But the problem is the early game is where the campaign is at. The late game is not interesting, so it makes everything worse. At number 4, it has to be Kislev. Out of the races in Warhammer 3, Kislev has good magic, has good growth, has good lords. Not necessarily the legendary lords, Catherine is pretty useless, but in terms of generic lords, at least ice witches. But regardless, Kislev does have a good amount of power. Army roster, magic roster, you name it. The problem is, the way they're designed does not work well at all within the Warhammer 3 meta. Their economy is not good enough to keep up with the demands of their campaign, because Kislev campaigns, all of them, without exception, are going to throw you on the deep end from the very, very beginning. Now, you can win. You do have the army for it, and economy-wise, you can abuse various things like region trading to make it work. But the problem is, almost everyone can abuse region trading. That's not the problem. The problem for Kislev is that how important it is to take advantage of it, or cheesing the AI in every way, shape, or form, as opposed to having a nightmarish campaign on your hands. Now, it's great to play Kislev, Katrin, Boris Ursus, Kastalten even, to understand some of these tricks and how to use them, how to really push for them. But I think designing having a race work like that is not a great situation. Because let me say this plainly. Having to start a campaign and the first freaking thing you do for the first few turns, and even constantly throughout that, is thinking how you can scam the AI for money so you can have the economy to deal with your problems, is not a great campaign meta. It is powerful if you use it, sure, but it is not fun. And you might say, well, you just don't do it. Okay, just don't do it and have one of the worst economies in the game while surrounded by a half a dozen or a dozen enemies that can attack you, especially if they perceive you as being weak. It matters how you deal with the challenge. It matters if the tools available to deal with that are good ones or bad ones. You do have the tools, but the way the game handles everything is just not especially great. And look, even if region trading was removed tomorrow, it doesn't matter. We played without abusing this when Realms of Chaos came out, and we thought Kislev was awful. Like, it's not like the issues of Kislev came out and with Immortal Empires. They were present at the launch of the game. People did not like Kislev when the game came out, for good reason. Their economy was bad, their systems were bad, the supporter system. I can go on. You understand my point, I hope, on this subject. Thankfully, Creative Assembly is going to update them as a race, so yeah, that's going to be better. But the only reason Kislev is not higher on this list is because for all their issues, and make no mistake, they are Legion, there are ways to play a campaign and make them extremely powerful. It's just that those ways are not especially fun to engage in once you realize. Like, let me give you a counterexample. Do you know why Arbol is really a really fun campaign? It's not because he's easy. I mean, it's like, oh, you can win every battle. Look, an army of Akshan and armor costers defeats 99% of foes in a campaign, right? Let's put that nonsense away. Arbol can go against very big threats, but the reason he's fun is he has a great unit diversity and doesn't have to worry about the fucking economic problems. He doesn't have to cheese his campaign to be fun. He can. Don't get me wrong, he absolutely freaking can. But a campaign is great when you can play it without even thinking about the cheese, without even thinking about, like, what's the number over here, and still have a great time. That is what makes Arbol one of the best campaigns in the game. That is not the situation with Kislev. And number 3, it is Norska. Now, let me demonstrate exactly why Norska is such an awful race. It's not down to their very limited unit roster, though it is a very limited unit roster. It's not even down to their awful economy that only goes up to 150. Sure, you can gain more money from ports, but ports are vulnerable in ways other settlements are not. They're expensive to build. But that's not really the issue, the biggest issue. If I teleport Wulfric over here to the Grayling Moot, right? One of the things you need to do in a Norska campaign, one of the things that gives you power, one of the things that you're obligated to do as part of your victory conditions is to raise settlements. Now, if we auto-resolve this, right, we can see that we get all these benefits, but crucially, we're not sacking the settlement. The issue there is when you do this, this creates the problem of you lose money that you don't have, I might add, because Norska doesn't have a good economy, so you rely on sacking settlements. If you do sack, however, a settlement, you can't raise it on the same turn. That's the problem. Like, if I go over here, I can only occupy it. Okay, so that's one issue. The other issue, let me just teleport him again. If I teleport him over here to Doomkeep, the other issue with all of this is you raise a settlement, and a faction that does raising settlements well, let's consider Khorne, would gain some movement range on raising the settlement, or would gain benefits except like a benefit at the top over here. Now, in this case, I was lucky because Wulfric did not move. I've seen that happen before in certain campaigns. Sometimes they move, sometimes they don't. It depends on the terrain. Like, Norska itself is decent enough. Outside of Norska, if you go into Empire, things get a lot uglier in that respect. But this means you have one army following another, and you are wasting 2 turns on every settlement. One turn, you're sacking the settlement because you want to gain the money. The second turn, you're raising the settlement to appeal to the gods. And then you're trying to recover that settlement as well. Why would you take it over? Well, if it's a port settlement, you won't need the money. If it's not a port settlement, you still want it for the sake of trading it with another faction. Funnily enough, Norska does have a great deal of diplomatic options, including vassalization, which, yeah, it is a pretty big deal to be able to vassalize other factions. But the way they play out is just not great. And don't even get me started on the lack of mechanics for Wulfric and Trog, or the mess of a research tree that we have over here. Like, clearly Norska was designed for like a Warhammer 1, and then they updated it for Warhammer 2, and yeah, updated it again. But the problem is, updating this under the principle, like, we're going to play a long-ass campaign, you tell me with a serious face that someone's going to go to... Well, okay, Nagaron is not the worst thing, but Khemri? Seriously? Or Lustria as Norska? Or Greases? Seriously, we're going to go to Greases. Jeez, I could go on, but that research tree just doesn't make any freaking sense. It doesn't make sense for a long campaign, it doesn't make sense for a short campaign. The monster hunts themselves are using the old quest system from Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. And so, and the battles themselves are kind of bullshit, by the way. The benefits are not worth the effort, because their battle is designed in such a way that you can easily lose a lot of troops because of bullshit magical abilities, not because of the enemies in there. So you gotta actually play those carefully, or get an auto-resolve mod. But the problem is triggering said battles, because you have these objectives and they can bug out very, very quickly, and you have to do these steps. There's mods for that, but mods are not fixing the sacking, raising, occupying bullshit that you want to do to be efficient as Norska. And even if you do all of that, like, your unit roster is not that interesting until you get to tier 4, really. Well, tier 3 at the very least, right? You do get Marauder champions, though they take 2 turns to recruit. I really wish CA hadn't done that for basic infantry units. I think the only units that should take more than 1 turn to recruit are units that you would only get to limited quantities, like monsters or, big-ass monsters. When you put that on an infantry unit, which you might form as a core of your army, it's not exactly great. It's one of the problems why people don't, recruit, for instance, Bloodletters, Exalted Bloodletters, and Khorne campaigns, because beyond the issues that those have with our resolve, it's like, I can recruit Chosen in a turn. Why the hell would I not recruit Chosen versus Bloodletters? I can afford either, but I'll get one army faster with one system. That's not even considering the, global recruitment situation with regards to that. So, yeah. Norska needs a better roster and needs better mechanics. Honestly, to some extent, I think they need to be removed from the game and just made a variant of Warriors of Chaos. Like, take the Warriors of Chaos mechanics, don't call it Warriors of Chaos, but take the Warriors of Chaos mechanic to some extent and adapt them for Norska. Maybe keep Norska as it is for the vassals that Warriors of Chaos have, but the actual Norskan playable races would be much better as Warriors of Chaos. Or Khorne. Seriously, Khorne or Warriors of Chaos or even Nurgle are much better to play than how Norska plays at the moment. And number 2, it would have to be the Lizardmen. Now, one of the big problems of the Lizardmen doesn't actually have to do with their race, it has to do with the jungle. Navigating the jungle, partly because of the movement speed, partly because of the way the jungles are designed in Warhammer 3, is slow, tedious, and pretty damn awful, I gotta say. Lustria in particular has so many terrain bugs, glitches, issues that it's not even fun to deal with. Like, this corner right here near the floating pyramid is my personal portion of hell in Warhammer 3. I'm not joking. There's so many issues with movement over there, it's not even funny. Just play Aeon Bow campaign, you'll understand very quickly what I'm talking about there. So the jungle itself is not great, but here's the thing. The Lizardmen are kind of one of the worst races to deal with the jungle, partly because they have no way to move faster than, obviously, Force March. You look at Skaven, you look at Dwarves, you look at Greenskins. They have the Underoy. Now, Alifanar is better at dealing with the jungle than the Lizardmen. And that's saying a freaking lot, because Alifanar does not handle climate very well in this game. So that is saying quite a bit in a campaign. That's the first problem, the jungle aspect and the lack of tools to deal with that. But it's worse for Lizardmen, because you see Lizardmen have a decent enough economy, but the needs they have in their campaign far outweigh what that economy can generate. Like, 400 resources for a tier 3 economic building is not bad, but when you have great distances to cover and your armies are relatively expensive to be effective, Saurus in particular are one of the most effective armies to mass, you end up in a situation with limited armies, limited movement, and limited resources to deal with various things. There are ways to make it work, but it says a lot about Axiatol's campaign, for instance, that his campaign is the best Lizardman campaign by far, and he doesn't have to deal with jungle warfare at all. Take the Lizardman out of the jungle, things get better. You could argue about Nakai. Nakai starts in the jungle, and yeah, just the terrain there in Eastern Cafe doesn't necessarily suit his campaign either. So it's a slow playstyle in a campaign that's dictated by, that's decided more or less by turn 30. You may not have that luxury in a Lizardman campaign. I mean, Saurus army is really strong. Like, you take a bunch of tier 2 Saurus, you can win against Scarbrand. I've done it in this campaign, specifically as Krokar. Another thing is that everything that Lizardmen are required to do, like getting stuff done in terms of construction, getting research, it is slow. Research needs buildings, various buildings to unlock. You may start with a couple of things, but then you need to get more things in order to unlock it. That is not a great system in general. And the vast majority of research trees have moved away from the system. Lizardmen also need to do it. Like, every tier, every research tree here needs a research to begin working on it. Then you need to get another building to get the middle path here, and then another building to get the final paths here. As you might imagine, the research tree is pretty nightmarish to deal with. Even with mods that make it instantly. Like, I've played Lizardmen campaigns with mods that speed up construction, give you tons of money. Something just feels off. Like, you You think that an army of dinosaurs riding dinosaurs would be awesome, but it's one of the most tedious, boring, awful campaigns in the game. And I think part of it is beyond, the research, economic, construction time benefits. Like, you have units that require different structures to recruit, right? Like, oh, you want to recruit Temple Guard, or Secret Crux Guard, you need to get a building right here, right? That's just one example. You want to increase you want to get certain heroes. Good luck. Some heroes require you to get to tier freaking 5 to increase. And also, a lot of, some of these heroes just don't feel that great. Like, you consider a skink chief in a Lizardmen campaign. Yeah, they give you replenishment. That's all they give you. Let me tell you something about heroes. They need to give more than just an army effect to be worth it. I mean, Soul Bloods are good, but the Lizardmen casters, I don't know, they don't really feel that great. They're limited in numbers. That's a problem. And they feel like some of the most generic, boring casters in the game. I mean, yeah, you can ride Ancient Stegodons on Skink Priests. That's pretty awesome. If you get to rank 24 with one, have fun with that. Okay, rank 22, let's be fair on that. So you can make it work in 70 freaking turns. That's the problem. If you can only make a race work in 60, 70 turns, whereas other races are snappy and interesting and fast-paced and good and really compelling to play on turn 1. Khorne is like that, Ogres is like that, Empire is like that, Dwarves are like that. Hell, even Chaos Dwarves, who have their own pacing issues, are really freaking awesome because you have at least ways of getting past that. Even Kislev, for all the fundamental issues Kislev has, and they are legion, at least you have a way, a horrible way I would add, at least you have a way of making things more fun, interesting, and compelling. Like playing with an entire endgame Kislev army, which by the way you can acquire pretty quickly, considering, growth and all that, is fun. Lizardmen don't even have that. So, really, when I think of a race that needs to be taken out of the game and rebuilt from scratch, I really think of the Lizardmen. But hilariously enough, I don't think they're the worst race to play right now in the game. And finally, at number 1, we have the Vampire Coast. One of the things I should mention about every single race on this list so far is that every single one of them has armies that work. Even Slaanesh, for all the issues you have in auto-resolve with Slaanesh, the army itself, when you actually use it, works. It's fast, can do a lot of damage, can annihilate enemies. That's one thing. But then you play a race like the Vampire Coast. It doesn't have an army. It's a faction of heroes with artillery. And it's not even the best artillery in the game. You look at the Empire, the different types of artillery, the siege tanks as well, or steam tanks, land ships, etc. Hellstorms, that's artillery. Having one Queen Bess in your entire faction is not good freaking artillery. Having some cannons and mortars, I mean, the mortars are pretty strong until you start talking about some of the, electric count variants. The mortars are certainly strong, but the actual army roster itself is very weak. And this is important because depending on what you're dealing with, you can't just rely on artillery to win your battles. The first campaign, by the way, that I finished in Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires, when it came out, was as Count Noctilus on Legendary difficulty. That was a nightmare. I could win every battle, sure, because you have incredibly powerful magic, incredibly durable heroes that are just very hard to kill in most battles, and you can make essentially a hero doomstack. Or not necessarily a doomstack, you actually don't have that much hero capacity, but you can make a combination of heroes and artillery that's very difficult to beat by the AI. The problem is you may only have one army, and that means less tactical flexibility on the campaign map. But the reason you only have one army is because, one, your hero capacity is extremely freaking limited outside of getting Pirate Coves. The problem with Pirate Coves is that you're literally sacking his elements, getting less money, I might add, to set this up. Or you're paying 3,000 gold in order to set it up with a hero. If you set it up with a hero, despite the cost, that's okay enough. But if you set it up by fighting a faction, grats, you just pissed off a faction, you're deliberately leaving them alive so you can get the benefit in terms of recruitment. And mind you, that is the tangible benefit over there. Sure, you can also go for economic potential, But even with these pirate coves, there is actually a problem. See, these can only be put in ports, but there is one hero capacity that can only really be increased from main settlement ports. Yeah, that's the vampire fleet captains. Sure, you do have the ability of increasing capacity for vampire fleet captains from any horde army you can get, but you can only get up to 5 of these horde armies in a campaign. There's also a title over here that increases too, though it's bugged, as if you dismiss the lord, the effect stops working, and even when you get the lord again, which I did over here, it doesn't trigger anymore, so I'm stuck on 1. That's fun. Maybe I just need to move him from the office and put him back there, right? Maybe that will fix it. I don't know. Yeah, it does, because it's like this game, because that's the thing. It is buggy as dirt. So you can get some decent level of heroes, you can get incredibly powerful magic, you can get all these benefits, but the fundamental problem is the army that the Vampire Coast has. For campaign, I'm not talking about multiplayer, I'm sure for multiplayer there's reasons for it, but for a campaign, think of this. Vampire counts work because they have masses of cheap units to support their really powerful stuff. Their heroes, their lords, their extremely powerful monsters. You don't. I mean, you have the equivalent of zombies, but you don't have the super zombies that even a basic necromancer lord can lead. Don't even get me started on some of the insanities that the vampire counts can get with their zombies through other things. And that's every unit, like every low tier unit. They're all like garbage tier, low armor, low leadership units. The problem with low armor, low leadership units that get destroyed when you lose them is you are going to lose a lot of them. Now you might say, well, I don't care. Well, you should care because they cost money to replenish. Like, you can go entire campaigns with vampire counts as just a comparison, or Tomb Kings who have the same issue with their units and do have pretty crappy units as well. And you can afford to not lose a single unit. Given the roster you have, though, you're going to lose a lot more than just cheap shit in a Vampire Coast campaign, because you're going to lose actual expensive units that are harder to replace, including, crazily enough, the Dick Gunners. So one of your more powerful range units are kind of like a artillery piece with a handful of entities, but one of your more powerful range units is squishy as dirt. Durability matters on all kinds of units. When durability on melee units is actually less important than range units, because you might get destroyed from range, but in melee, armor is less of a factor. There's other things that come into play there. But in ranged, a basic High Elven army can destroy anything that the Vampire Coast can throw against them. Oh, but mortars can destroy it. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to counter mortars. There's a lot of ways to counter them. Like, you're the corner camping faction, and even that's not especially great, because you have the dwarves, you have the chaos dwarves, you have the empire, you have Cafe. Freaking hell, Kislev is a much better corner camping army. Like, the problem is, outside of certain units which have a decent enough range, a lot of the stuff you have does not have the range compete with other stuff. Like, consider one of your basic range units, 145 range, right? With very freaking low durability. Let me give you an idea. Skeletal archer chariots have 140 range right there. And the thing is, it's not just about the range right here, it's about the freaking durability. When you're talking about the durability that's actually worse than Skaven Slaves, but the actual cost of that, like, put the Rattling Gunner versus any Vampire Coast unit or infantry unit, and you're gonna get demolished. Don't even get me started when you go up against something like the Dwarves, which you might, because a lot of people hate you. And that's not even accepting the fact that a lot of units don't even have necessarily that kind of range. Durability is a problem. Siege warfare, as these guys, is one of the most nightmarish situations. Because with sieges, right, the way you win sieges in most campaigns is you either have a ranged army, which kills everything beyond the walls and you go in, or you have a melee army, which throws itself into it. You have neither. Because your range army is going to get annihilated by even a couple of units, and your melee army is too expensive for what you can afford. And you don't, and the crazy part is, some people will argue, oh, I can make a lot of money from sacking and looting settlements. I will always reply this: how many fucking armies can you maintain in a Vampire Coast campaign? Because I can tell you, I can maintain 20 stacks very damn freaking quickly in a campaign. Or actually, I can maintain 20 stacks of higher end units as the Skaven far faster than the freaking Vampire Coast can do so. Don't even get me started on what the Dark Elves can do. Like, you want to talk about the naval mastery race that has range dominance? Dark Elves. Seriously. They may not have the artillery, but they have better army abilities, infinite amounts of horde armies, even if there is a cooldown, which, by the way, they might get Black Arcs faster than you will realistically in a campaign. Black Arcs that matter anyway, especially if you're playing low tier. They get a major upkeep benefit for those Black Arcs. For all their units, they can recruit every unit from those Black Arcs with ease, and those Black Arcs are not necessary in any way, shape, or form for increasing their hero capacity, because they increase their hero capacity by land. And on top of that, they also earn one of the highest freaking incomes in the entire freaking game for their regular settlement buildings. This is a good naval dominance race. This is cheap shit in comparison to that. Like, between the Dark Elves, Norska, and Vampire Coast, funnily enough, Norska is actually better in naval dominance. Because you know why they're better at naval dominance? Because Norska can get biblical amounts of money through sacking and looting settlements. You know, the whole bloody point of a Vampire Coast campaign. You don't. Norska, while they pay a huge price early on in the campaign and have a roster of relatively weak units early on, the moment Norska starts unleashing Marauder champions and trolls and shit like that, you feel it. You are terrified of that. I don't think I've ever played a campaign in my entire Warhammer 3 experience where I was terrified of fighting the Vampire Coast. I can tell you I've been terrified as hell of dealing with Wolfric and Trog in some campaigns. In some campaigns as powerful races. That should give you an indication of where things stand. And you know what the worst insanity thing is? Norska is actually better as a naval dominance faction, because even though their land settlements generate very little income, their ports generate biblical amounts of income, especially the longer you play in the campaign. Norska has tons of issues, but at least they can function. You just have to jump through 20 freaking steps to make it. The Vampire Coast has no army, no economy, hero capacity that's tied to an idiotic system. Either you're sacrificing vampire fleet capacity because you're not taking those ports and you're setting up pirate coves, or you're setting up pirate coves, or you're not setting up pirate coves and you're sacrificing the Morgul hunters and gunnery white capacity. That is a brilliant choice right there from Creative Assembly, right there. Like, I understand why the Vampire Coast works so brilliantly in Warhammer 2. Meta has changed. In Warhammer 2, having 1 or 2 or 5 very powerful armies was really good because of supply lines really making it punishing to maintain very large armies. Or a lot of armies on a campaign map. In Warhammer 3, supply lines are significantly reduced. And so we don't care about that. Maintain 20 stacks by turn 30. It's not really... It depends on which faction you're talking about. Cafe in particular can do that. So... what exactly is the Vampire Coast great at? They don't have the best heroes. I mean, they have powerful ones, but certainly not the best. I think Warriors of Chaos win that title. They don't have the best gunpowder range capability in their infantry. Sure as shit that doesn't happen. The Empire wins on that aspect, and even the Dwarves win on that aspect. But I think Nolan Iron sides just have that bit of extra edge. Artillery-wise, Cafe beats them. The Empire beats them. The Dwarves beat them. Hell, I'll even make the argument that Bretonnia with their blessed trebuchets beats them. I'm gonna say it. I think that's a bit exaggerated. So artillery, do I need to compare the Vampire Coast versus what the Skaven can fucking do? Like, you want to talk about like how to have good range gunpowder units? Skaven do this. They have Rattling Gunners, Jezzails, Plague Claw catapults, or Blinding Cannons. Actual mortars on infantry that are good. Jesus. You put the Vampire Coast mortars versus the Skaven mortar teams? Let me just say it. I want bombardiers far more than these mortars. I mean, look, the Vampire Coast mortars is the only saving grace of a unit in a campaign, because it's actually good. But it's just one unit. Depth guard are too expensive and not effective enough to justify their cost. I mean, they certainly will tear through a lot of other units, but considering the cost, I would bloody well expect it. Aranessa has a saving grace because you can get man-eaters if you own the Ogre DLC. But that is the discussion. But yeah, this is genuinely the worst race to play in the game. And I'm sure some people are going, oh, but I enjoy it. Good for you. I'm sure plenty of people enjoyed Nurgle before they were fixed. Just because you enjoy it does not mean it's broken. That's where I'll end it. Questine signing out.